Hello, this is Morale Bernard, continuing with the story of Wuthering Heights. Yes, Wuthering Heights, story about Heathcliff and Catherine. Last words were that she held Heathcliff's hands again and laughed. Yeah. I shall think it a dream tomorrow, she cried. I shall not be able to believe that I have seen and touched and spoken to you once more. And yet, cruel Heathcliff, you don't deserve this welcome. To be absent and silent for 3 years and never to think of me. A little more than you have thought of me, he murmured. I heard of your marriage, Cathy, not long since, and while waiting in the yard below, I meditated this plan just to have one glimpse of your face, a stare of surprise perhaps, and pretended pleasure. Afterwards, settle my score with Hindley, and then prevent the law by doing execution on myself. Your welcome has put these ideas out of my mind, but beware of meeting me with another aspect next time. Nay, you'll not drive me off again. You were really sorry for me, were you? Well, there was cause. I fought through a bitter life since I last heard your voice, and you must forgive me, for I struggled only for you. Catherine, unless we are to have cold tea, please come to the table, interrupted Linton, striving to preserve his ordinary tone and a due measure of politeness. Mr. Heathcliff will have a long walk wherever he may lodge tonight, and I'm thirsty. She took her post before the urn, and Miss Isabella came, summoned by the bell. Then, having handed their chairs forward, I left the room. The meal hardly endured 10 minutes. Catherine's cup was never filled. She could neither eat nor drink. Edgar had made a slop in his saucer and scarcely swallowed a mouthful. Their guest did not protract his stay that evening above an hour longer. I asked as he departed if he went to Gimmerton. No, to Wuthering Heights, he answered. Mr. Earnshaw invited me when I called this morning. Mr. Earnshaw invited him, and he called on Mr. Earnshaw. I pondered this sentence painfully after he was gone. Is he turning out a bit of a hypocrite and coming into the country to work mischief under a cloak? I mused. I had a presentiment in the bottom of my heart that he had better have remained away. About the middle of the night, I was wakened from my first nap by Mrs. Linton, gliding into my chamber, taking a seat on my bedside and pulling me by the hair to rouse me. I cannot rest, Ellen, she said, by way of apology, and I want some living creature to keep me company in my happiness. Edgar is sulky because I'm glad of a thing that does not interest him. He refuses to open his mouth except to utter petty, silly speeches. And he affirmed I was cruel and selfish for wishing to talk when he was so sick and sleepy. He always contrives to be sick at the least cross. I gave a few sentences of commendation to Heathcliff, and he, either for a headache or a pang of envy, began to cry. So I got up and left him. What use is it praising Heathcliff to him? I answered. As lads, they had an aversion to each other, and Heathcliff would hate just as much to hear him praised. It's human nature. Let Mr. Linton alone about him, unless he would like an open quarrel between them. But does it not show great weakness, pursued she? I'm not envious. I never feel hurt at the brightness of Isabella's yellow hair and the whiteness of her skin, at her dainty elegance and the fondness all the family exhibit for her. Even you, Nellie. If we have a dispute sometimes, you back Isabella at once, and I yield like a foolish mother. I call her darling, and flatter her into a good temper. It pleases her brother to see us cordial, and that pleases me. But they are very much alike. They are spoiled children, and fancy the world was made for their accommodation. And though I humour both, I think a smart chastisement might improve them all the same. You're mistaken, Mrs. Linton, said I. They humour you. I know what there would be to do if they did not. You can well afford to indulge their passing whims as long as their business is to anticipate all your desires. You may, however, fall out at last over something of equal consequence to both sides, and then those you term weak are very capable of being as obstinate as you. And then we shall fight to the death, shan't we, Nellie? She returned, laughing. No, I tell you, I have such faith in Linton's love that I believe I might kill him, and he wouldn't wish to retaliate. I advised her to value him the more for his affection. I do, she answered, but he needn't resort to whining for trifles. It is childish, and instead of melting into tears because I said that Heathcliff was now worthy of anyone's regard, and it would honour the first gentleman in the country to be his friend, he ought to have said it for me and been delighted from sympathy. He must get accustomed to him, and he may as well like him, considering how Heathcliff has reason to object to him. I'm sure he behaved excellently. What do you think of his going to Wuthering Heights? I inquired. He's reformed in every respect, apparently, quite a Christian, offering the right hand of fellowship to his enemies all round. He explained it, she replied. I wonder as much as you. He said he called to gather information concerning me from you, supposing you resided there still. And Joseph told Hindley, who came out and fell to questioning him of what he had been doing, and how he had been living, and finally desired him to walk in. There were some persons sitting at cards. Heathcliff joined them. My brother lost some money to him, and finding him plentifully supplied, he requested that he would come again in the evening, to which he consented. Hindley is too reckless to select his acquaintance prudently. He doesn't trouble himself to reflect on the causes he might have for mistrusting one whom he has basely injured. But Heathcliff affirms his principal reason for resuming a connection with his ancient persecutor is a wish to install himself in quarters at walking distance from the Grange, and an attachment to the house where we live together, and likewise a hope that I shall have more opportunities of seeing him there than I could have if he settled in Gimmerton. He means to offer liberal payment for permission to lodge at the Heights, and doubtless my brother's covetousness will prompt him to accept the terms. He was always greedy, though what he grasps with one hand he flings away with the other. It's a nice place for a young man to fix his dwelling in, said I. Have you no fear of the consequences, Mrs. Linton? None for my friend, she replied. His strong head will keep him from danger, a little from Hindley, but he can't be made morally worse than he is, and I stand between him and bodily harm. The event of this evening has reconciled me to God and humanity. I had risen in angry rebellion against Providence. Oh, I've endured very, very bitter misery, Nellie. If that creature knew how bitter, he'd be ashamed to cloud its removal with idle petulance. It was kindness for him which induced me to bear it alone. Had I expressed the agony I frequently felt, He would have been taught to long for its alleviation as ardently as I. However, it's over, and I'll take no revenge on his folly. I can afford to suffer anything hereafter. Should the meanest thing alive slap me on the cheek, I'd not only turn the other, but I'd ask pardon for provoking it, and as proof, I'll go make my peace with Edgar instantly. Good night. I'm an angel. In this self-complacent conviction, she departed, and the success of her fulfilled resolution was obvious on the morrow. Mr. Linton had not only abjured his peevishness, though his spirit seemed still subdued by Catherine's exuberance of vivacity, but he ventured no objection to her taking Isabella with her to Wuthering Heights in the afternoon. And she rewarded him with such a summer of sweetness and affection in return as made the house a paradise for several days, both master and servants profiting from the perpetual sunshine. Mr. Heathcliff, I should say in future, under the liberty of visiting at Thrushcross Grange cautiously at first. He seemed estimating how far its owner would bear his intrusion. Catherine also deemed it judicious to moderate her expressions of pleasure in receiving him, and he gradually established his right to be expected. He retained a great deal of the reserve for which his boyhood was remarkable, and that served to repress all startling demonstrations of feeling. My master's uneasiness experienced a lull, and further circumstances diverted it into another channel for a space. His new source of trouble sprang from the not anticipated misfortune of Isabella Linton evincing a sudden and irresistible attraction towards the tolerated guest. She was, at that time, a charming young lady of 18, infantile in manners, though possessed of keen wit, keen feelings, and a keen temper too, if irritated. Her brother, who loved her tenderly, was appalled at this fantastic preference. Leaving aside the degradation of an alliance with a nameless man and the possible fact that his property, in default of heirs, male, might pass into such a one's power, he had sense to comprehend Heathcliff's disposition, to know that, though his exterior was altered, his mind was unchangeable and unchanged. And he dreaded that mind. It revolted him. He shrank forebodingly from the idea of committing Isabella to its keeping. He would have recoiled still more had he been aware that her attachment rose unsolicited, and was bestowed where it awakened no reciprocation of sentiment, for the minute he discovered its existence he laid the blame on Heathcliff's deliberate designing. We had all remarked, during some time, that Miss Linton fretted and pined over something. She grew cross and wearisome, snapping at and teasing Catherine continually, at the imminent risk of exhausting her limited patience. We excused her to a certain extent on the plea of ill health. She was dwindling and fading before our eyes. But one day, when she had been peculiarly wayward, rejecting her breakfast, complaining that the servants did not do what she told them, that the mistress would allow her to be nothing in the house, and Edgar neglected her, that she had caught a cold with the doors being left open, and we let the parlour fire go out on purpose to vex her with 100 yet more frivolous accusations. Mrs. Linton peremptorily insisted that she should get to bed, and having scolded her heartily, threatened to send for the doctor. Mention of Kennet caused her to exclaim instantly that her health was perfect, and it was only Catherine's harshness which made her unhappy. "How can you say I'm harsh, you naughty fondling?" cried the mistress, amazed at the unreasonable assertion. "You are surely losing your reason. When have I been harsh? Tell me." "Yesterday," sobbed Isabella. "And now?" "Yesterday," said her sister-in-law. "On what occasion?" "In our walk along the moor. You told me to ramble where I pleased while you sauntered on with Mr. Heathcliff." "And that's your notion of harshness?" said Catherine, laughing. "It was no hint that your company was superfluous. We didn't care whether you kept with us or not. I merely thought Heathcliff's talk would have nothing entertaining for your ears." "Oh, no," wept the young lady. "You wished me away because you knew I liked to be there." "Is she sane?" asked Mrs. Linton, appealing to me. "I'll repeat our conversation word for word, Isabella, and you point out any charm it could have had for you." "I don't mind the conversation," she answered. "I wanted to be with—" "Well," said Catherine, perceiving her hesitate to complete the sentence. "With him. And I won't be always sent off," she continued, kindling up. "You are a dog in the manger, Cathy, and desire no one to be loved but yourself." "You are an impertinent little monkey," exclaimed Mrs. Linton in surprise, "but I'll not believe this idiocy. It is impossible that you can covet the admiration of Heathcliff, that you consider him an agreeable person. I hope I have misunderstood you, Isabella." "No, you have not," said the infatuated girl. "I love him more than ever you love Edgar, and he might love me if you would let him." "I wouldn't be you for a kingdom, then," Catherine declared emphatically, and she seemed to speak sincerely. "Nellie, help me to convince her of her madness. Tell her what Heathcliff is, an unreclaimed creature without refinement, without cultivation, an arid wilderness of furze and whinstone. I'd as soon put that little canary into the park on a winter's day as recommend you to bestow your heart on him. It is deplorable ignorance of his character, child, and nothing else which makes that dream enter your head. Pray, don't imagine that he conceals depths of benevolence and affection beneath a stern exterior. He's not a rough diamond, a pearl containing oyster for rustic. He's a fierce, pitiless, wolfish man. I never say to him, let this or that enemy alone, because it would be ungenerous or cruel to harm them. I say, let them alone, because I should hate them to be wronged. And he'd crush you like a sparrow's egg, Isabella, if he found you a troublesome charge. I know he couldn't love a Linton, and yet he'd be quite capable of marrying your fortune and expectations. Avarice is grown with him, a besetting sin. There's my picture, and I'm his friend, so much so that had he thought seriously to catch you, I should perhaps have held my tongue and let you fall into his trap. Miss Linton regarded her sister-in-law with indignation. For shame, she repeated angrily. You are worse than 20 foes, you poisonous friend. Ah, you won't believe me then, said Catherine. You think I speak from wicked selfishness. I'm certain you do, retorted Isabella, and I shudder at you. Good, cried the other. Try for yourself if that be your spirit. I have done, and yield the argument to your saucy insolence. And I must suffer for her egotism, she sobbed, as Mrs. Linton left the room. All is against me. She has blighted my single consultation. But she uttered falsehood, didn't she? Mr. Heathcliff is not offended. He has an honourable soul and a true one, or how could he remember her? Banish him from your thoughts, miss, I said. He's a bird of bad omen. No mate for you, Mrs. Linton spoke strongly, and yet I can't contradict her. She's better acquainted with his heart than I, or anyone besides, and she never would represent him as worse than he is. Honest people don't hide their deeds. How has he been living? How has he got rich? Why is he staying at Wuthering Heights, the house of a man whom he abhors? They say Mr. Earnshaw is worse and worse since he came. They sit up all night together continually, and Hindley has been borrowing money on his land and does nothing but play and drink. I heard only a week ago it was Joseph who told me. I met him at Gimmerton. Nelly, he said, we've had the coroner question now and folks. One of 'em's the most forgotten his finger cut off with hoarding over for sticking a calf. That's Mr. Yarno, of the pose going to grand sizes. He's no fear of the benches of judges, nor the Paul, nor Peter, nor John, nor Matthew, nor known on M, not he. He fair likes. He langs to set his brazen face again. And yon bonny lad Heathcliff, you mind, he's a rare one. He can grin and laugh as well. Only bodies is a devil. Does he never say nowt of his fine living among us when he goes to the Grange? 'Tis the way to it, up at sundown, dice, brandy, closed shutters, and candlelight, till next day at noon, till fooling gangs are banning up raving to his chamber, making decent folks dig their fingers through lugs of fur, very shame, and the knave, why he can't browse, and eat, and sleep, and off to his neighbours to gossip with the wife. I course, he tells Dame Catherine how her father's gold runs into his pocket, and her father's son gallops down the broad road while he flees afore to open pikes. Now Miss Linton, Joseph, is an old rascal, but no liar. And if his account of Heathcliff's conduct be true, you would never think of desiring such a husband, would you? You are leagued with the rest, Ellen, she replied. I'll not listen to your slanders. What malevolence you must have to wish to convince me that there is no happiness in the world. Oh, join me. Join me for the next video of Wuthering Heights. Join me for the next video of Wuthering Heights and find out what's happening to Isabella, who seems to be quite charmed by Heathcliff. Join me for the next video of Wuthering Heights from Morale. See you then.